Oh, you're okay.
All right.
Welcome, everybody. This is Bobby Hacker, your host of Sports Shorts. And today, for episode 42, our guest is David Cornwell, longtime SLA board member and president of DNK Holdings. But his background and his job history is quite special. And although we like to talk about paths and stuff, we could be here for 30 minutes with David talking about all the interesting stops he's had along his professional career. But I'm really happy to have you here today, and thanks for joining us, David.
Thank you, Bobby. It's my pleasure. It's great to be with you.
So as we like to start these shows, our little program here, we'd like to ask our guests to talk a little about what they're currently doing or what their company does, and to tell us a little bit about their path. And when we talk about the path, it's not just necessarily hitting all the jobs that you've had along your professional career, but moments that you think really helped to form you as an attorney and the style of practice that you've developed over your years. So the floor is yours, David.
Wow. Well, currently, I'm working with Live Golf, the new golf tour that has been in the news, not for great reasons, because of our competition with the PGA Tour. I think some of that noise is getting out of the system, and people are beginning to focus on the players that we have in the league, the unique nature of our competition. We have both team and individual competitions going on at the same time. I was asked to get involved in the Live project last summer through my representation of Dustin Johnson. I've represented Dustin since probably about 2016, I would guess. And he had been in discussions with the Saudis and related parties probably for a year or more. And last summer, they went to the contract process. And he called me and brought me up to speed and asked me to get involved to make sure that the contracts actually reflected what they had told him the deal would be. And it took some doing, but we finally got it done and kicked off in London. Prior to that, we had COVID, so I was working on my golf game. So the two came together at perfect time. But prior to that, professionally, in 2018, I was part of the group that started the Alliance of American Football. I was senior advisor to Charlie Ebersol, who was our CEO and general counsel. I came to that project initially as a consultant to write the player contract between the single entity AAF and their player employees. And as I was going through the process, I said to Charlie, you know, the player contract houses about 5% of the terms and conditions of employment between a player and a team. And the other 95% traditionally resides in a collective bargaining agreement. But the fact that we were a single entity meant in a startup, we weren't going to have a collective bargaining agreement. And after pulling his chin off the table, Charlie said, what should we do? So I started the process of drafting basically an employee manual for our player employees. There were some amazing experiences with the Alliance that really woke me up. One was the quality of the people we were working with. We would have a conference call every week. And this was a startup. What we were doing was something that nobody on the call had ever done before, except perhaps for Bill Polian and some of the folks he brought over. And the enthusiasm, the commitment, the desire that was evident in every single call was just, it was really remarkable. It's great to be part of a team like that. One of my responsibilities was to manage some of the tech guys who were we created an additional form of compensation, which the PGA copied last year, their player popularity fund, player impact program, is precisely what we were doing in the Alliance. Charlie wanted to figure out a way to pay players for engaging with their communities, with fans and things like that. So we actually created a unique identification number for every player and had our tech folks going to work to create technology that all of their actions could be recorded back to their number. And my foolish stereotypical experience was such that I expected the tech people that I was working with to be, short sleeve, button up short shirts and pocket protectors. But these folks were just as seasoned as business people as they were as technology folks. And again, just a remarkable experience that, really, really made the project an incredible, a lot of fun. But I think the best part, I had a chance to talk to Commissioner Roger Goodell as we were going through the process. And I said, yo, man, I didn't know I knew this much football. And I really didn't. I guess I picked up quite a bit along the way, but had never been asked to put it all together. And that was also rewarding. Very disappointing. We got through our fourth game and our primary investor at the time, Tom Dundon, the owner of Top Golf, had gotten enough of a taste of how expensive it was to run a sports league and pulled out. I think, I'm not quite sure how to describe all my experiences under any general headline, but I can tell you that I don't feel like I've ever had a job coming out of law school. I went to a law firm and was an antitrust and trade regulation litigator, some IP work. And the idea of getting paid to read, write, and think after 3 years of paying somebody else to do it in law school was remarkable. And so I left the law firm after 2 years and went in-house with the NFL and learned that football. Left the NFL, was an agent for 11 months. I just knew that I didn't have the attributes that would enable me to be successful as an agent, and became the general counsel of the Upper Deck Company at the time when trading cards were the hottest sports licensing product, certainly in the major sports. We made $300 million a year putting pictures on paper. And it was my responsibility to negotiate the deals with all of the leagues and, where applicable, the players' associations to get the ability to use player images, league marks, put them together to make a trading card. And after that, I decided to take the experience of having been a lawyer for a league, a lawyer for players in the league, and a lawyer for a licensee in the league, and see if I could turn that into a practice of law. Didn't quite know what it would look like, but I was hired coming out of Upper Deck to work with Lee Steinberg and Jeff Morad, the folks who I'd been an agent with previously. And they hired me to be general counsel of their sports agency right at the time when the wave of acquisitions of sports agencies was just about to start. I've forgotten the company, I think it was Clear Channel, bought David Falk, which was the first big one to go. And we ultimately sold to a Canadian money management firm called Asante Management. And they gave us the money to acquire other sports agencies. So we bought another football practice, a basketball practice, expand Jeff Morad's baseball practice, and Mike Gillis in hockey. And I became general counsel of that entire sports management group. While I was doing that, one of our fellow board members accidentally created a niche practice for me. Richard Bertelsen called one day to the offices and asked me whether Lee Steinberg and Jeff Morad would agree for me to represent players that were not their clients, essentially players that had other agents as their agents. If those players were confronting discipline under the drug or steroid programs for the National Football League, those programs were adopted while I was assistant counsel at the NFL. And so I knew them pretty well and had developed a pretty good track record up until that point with those cases. And Lee and Jeff agreed to let me do that. And voila, for 20 years, I represented sports agents and their clients, the professional athletes, all across the nation on, matters that nobody heard about, but a lot of matters that made headlines. Dealt with some very high-profile, career-threatening cases that, again, didn't feel like a job, but the responsibility was awesome to save careers, in some instances, keep players out of prison. So I haven't worked. What I do is an extension of who I am, and I'm grateful.
Well, that's always great. And, that old saying, you love your work, love what you do, you never really had a job. And it's great. And I know that feeling when you get especially for us that work in the sports world, I just like to say we have a better widget with which to work than doing other things. But what I think is important in this discussion, especially for any of the students that are checking in, is how we opened your path. And you began as a litigator. And I've often said that litigation background is critically important to being a good transactional lawyer and trying to figure out how to work around problems that people have in negotiating deals. Because having litigated things, you realize a lot of times you got into this place because your contract wasn't good enough. So do you feel that litigation experience really informed a lot of the history of your practice?
Absolutely. And, I allow for the possibility that I'm just a hostage to my own experiences. But before going into the sports world, I remember at Whitman and Ransom, the firm that I was with, us litigators would look across the hall at the corporate guys and say, why are you even doing this? It's going to be on my desk anyway, right? But I continue even to this day to see contracts where, the whereas, wherefore, heretofore, but for avoidance of doubt, blah, blah, blah. It's just impractical. I mean, you think I don't know. I don't really know what lawyers like that think that they're doing. And I suppose, to a certain extent, I think they're chewing on their fingernails and thinking they're making it difficult for the other side, which is completely counterproductive.
Couldn't agree more.
But not only is it counterproductive to the other side, and not only will it be counterproductive to your client when you have a third party looking at your, web of language that makes them, kind of throw up their hands. And now I'm as open to hearing your opponent tell me what this says as I am to hearing what you tell me it says. And you're starting behind, because if I'm the fact finder, you already had a chance and you didn't get it right when you put it in writing. But also it's not productive for the transaction. So
100%.
And we see this all the time, it's kind of, what's that line in, I forgot the movie, it's the difference between paper law and real law or something. You get these lawyers who think they're doing something, and I know in deals that I've done where corporate lawyers have gotten hung up on all this, their position and not their interest, and married to their language. I fought them on the language, but I always make sure to add more money to the deal while I'm doing it. And it ends up costing them money, which is ultimately my job, to maximize the value for my client when I'm doing those type of deals. It's just not practical. So I do think the litigation background makes you more practical.
Yeah, I think I know in my own practice, I've always found that anybody outside the deal should be able to read it and know who owes what obligation to whom. And oftentimes it gets very confusing. And in those longer agreements, like the gigantic broadcast rights agreements that I did, you're oftentimes making sure that the hardest part is making sure the definitions are consistent throughout an agreement, because you don't want to say, oh, well, here it has something different. So I think that's sort of the cautious nature, because you realize that if there's an issue comes up or a dispute between your client and whoever the party is with whom they're working, that you can just point to the language and says, right here, they owe this obligation to them, not some crazy language. Now, that is not to say, without naming names, I've worked with people who have said, leave it vague. And that always, the client tells me leave it vague. I'm kind of, they're the boss, but you send them an email saying, here's the reason why we should be more specific here. I want you to understand this. And those emails where they say, I understand this, have their own separate page in the file. It's just,
Right.
making sure that you've made sure that you let them know that this could happen if they want to go on their path. But we're not the clients. We're just trying to give them their better self.
And I understand that. What concerns me is when the client is being led by the lawyer and being misled into thinking that this, if you have to refer me, if I have to turn to another section to understand what you're talking about in this section, one of those two sections don't belong in this agreement, but it happens all the time. And, look, if we're talking to lawyers who don't read everything, then we got a bigger problem.
Absolutely.
I read everything. And I just, recall working on, with your point, definitions, a contract that in the 37th page, it said something limiting the other party's obligation. And my question was, well, then you just limited your rights because of the definition. And it doesn't appear that they knew that. And, if I were 32 or 31, maybe I would have a different reaction. I'm 61 and have been doing this for a long time. And they kind of lose their voice with me, right? You got me playing hide and seek, and it's counterproductive. I'm going to do it because that's how you've chosen to do this, but you really aren't going to ever convince me of anything going forward because you play games, and I'm not here to play games.
Yeah, I was recently negotiating on behalf of a client and having a conversation with another lawyer, and I said, I think we're in a good place, but right here, towards the end of the contract, paragraph 38 or whatever it was, you say something here that makes the rest of this contract irrelevant. And he goes, what do you mean? I go, you basically, we've laid out all these terms and we've all lined it up. And at the end, you want your client to have an absolute out. There's no contract. And he's going, but that's what my client wants. I go, yeah, I want to pick 6 lucky numbers every week and I don't, but I don't get that choice. And he said, well, I've talked to my client and I told my client said, if that's in, I don't want to do this deal because I have no protection.
Right.
Let's
just wake up every day and decide that day whether we want to work together.
Yeah, that's not a contract.
Right.
So
the other thing that I would say to young lawyers, you see the letterhead of the other side, their convoluted language and the respect they have from their colleagues, and that can be intimidating to you. Believe in yourself. Don't forget common sense when you become a lawyer, right? And if it doesn't make sense to you, it's unlikely that it makes sense to everybody except you. So don't be afraid. I don't try to clean up that language. I just put a note on the document, explain, or multiple question marks. And they can get all exacerbated as the prelim and the runway. Okay, now we got that done. Tell me what it means. And I bet they'll be the ones stumbling over it, and you'll find that they don't know either.
Oh, I think that, one of the great pieces of advice I ever got as a very young lawyer right out of school was something that I'd heard through my whole life in school, which was, there are no stupid questions. And I remember a senior lawyer saying to me, he says, I may give you a look, but if you have a question, you got to ask it, because it's the unanswered questions that always get you in deep shit.
No question.
And I don't have a problem, doing what I've done this a long time, saying to another lawyer, quite frankly, I have seen marginal comments I've written, I look back on and laugh, that say, I have no idea what this means. And they say, well, what do you mean? I said, read the sentence, diagram the sentence. For those of us that remember diagramming sentences, it makes no sense. I don't even know what this refers to. And they go, well, it means that. And I said, explain that to me. And sometimes they go, the best is, for whatever reason, when somebody says, yeah, I guess that is kind of confusing. And I said, let me take a shot at it, because at least I have a better sense of what it might be. But that's a really important lesson is, we're constantly questioning, and we've been trained to ask questions, to look at things. And I love what you said earlier. When you said, I read the whole thing, that 5 pages of tiny print terms and conditions, you got to read all of those. You got to know what they say. You got to make sure that they line up, because oftentimes those standard terms and conditions get attached to an agreement, and they counter a point that's in sort of the original text of the agreement, and you have to make sure those things line up. But
also in the LIV deal, they approached 4 players, Dustin being one of the 4, back in summer of 21. And when they started talking to other players, because they needed a total of 48, I represented a total of 12 going in, or that considered LIV. And besides Dustin and Patrick Cantlay, every other one of those players was referred to me by the Saudis. And one guy told me, one of the agents told me how he got to me, and that one of the Saudis said to him, hire David Cornwell. He's the only one who's read every page of every agreement.
So let's take a minute. You've already, told us about your experience at AAF, and you started early in your career. You worked for the NFL, and you worked for agencies that were, a lot of first-round draft choice NFL players. And I think, having worked at the league, you have a unique understanding of the culture of the league. For me, working on broadcast deals for so many years, I have a whole other sense of the culture of the league. But now you're in a different situation. You're in a golf startup working for the LIV people, and the battles, and I'm going to call them battles, some people may use kinder words, but the battles that exist between LIV and the PGA, and the PGA saying our culture is essentially the only culture of golf, and LIV is offering a different kind of competition, but there still seems to be, 2 rams bashing into each other. How is that developing or inhibiting the development of the LIV product?
Well, I guess it depends on who you speak to. When I first got involved last year, I saw immediately that this was free agency coming to golf. Choice. And while the folks in LIV are, top money people and top golf people, none of them have league experience, and certainly none of them have experience with the major sports in the NFL that have gone through free agents. And so I was unsuccessful in getting them to see what the term free agency comes to golf means in terms of substance and what follows. Multiple memos. It's not just that players have choice and make more money in free agency. In the traditional sports, they make more money because they're getting a greater percentage of defined revenues. And nobody has paid attention to the absolute fact that has followed in each of the sports after free agency. A natural partnership forms between players and owners because they share in the same pie and have the same interest to growing the pie. It is a fact. No one has paid, I have failed in getting them to embrace the concept that free agency brings innovation, even though they're now seeing it. What the PGA Tour, dismissed as exhibition golf is now going to be 20 events in the PGA Tour. They have Me Too'd LIV already. 4 tournaments into LIV's existence, the PGA is copying their structure with the elevated events that were announced 2 weeks ago. But one of our senior advisor and board members said to me, well, what do you mean? What does it mean? What's going to happen with innovation? And I looked at him and I said, well, the point about innovation is that today we don't know because it's innovative. It's going to happen. But what I can see is a worldwide Super Bowl of golf, bringing multiple federations around golf tours around the world together and having a golf Super Bowl. Sounds outlandish. You just wait till it happens in college football with all the consolidation that we're seeing. It's coming. They just went from 4 to 12, right? No one expected to have a playoff, let alone now they have a postseason. It can happen. That's innovation.
But do you see that maybe one day we end up having a LIV versus PGA like Ryder Cup event?
NFL versus AFL is possible. I think that it is unlikely because that seems to suggest that until it comes together at the Ryder Cup type competition, they exist separately from each other. And I think that's unlikely 24, 36, 48 months down the road. Innovation is going to take hold. I don't think that we even have streaming in sports, but for the 2 10-year collective bargaining agreements that we saw in the NFL and the prolonged collective bargaining agreement that we saw initially in basketball. I don't think that the entertainment companies that were investing in streaming as an entertainment distribution system would have invested in sports as streaming unless there was that labor piece. Innovation brought it, expanded streaming into the sports landscape. So I can't tell you what's going to happen, but I will tell you that something's going to happen. And it is unlikely that what's going to happen is that LIV is going to go away, because LIV has overcome the #1 impediment to a startup sports league, which is money. They've got endless money. And I believe while I don't think they turn on the spigot and let it run forever, I do believe they also have time and the commitment to make this happen. So, as long as LIV focuses on its knitting and doesn't spend a whole lot of time worrying about, whatever the PGA is throwing up against the wall to make stick, I think that it's going to expand and demand the attention of the rest of the golf world. The tournament that we had this weekend led me to say to our COO and outside counsel, they can't ignore us now. If the Golf Channel and the OWGR and institutions in sports continue to try to get away with talking about human rights violations and ignoring the substance of the competition and the quality of the sport, it's going to say more about them than it does about us. But I would like to say something about that human rights issue. I recognize that everyone can have a personal and is entitled to a personal reaction to such, human issues. My reaction is that I agree. You know, there's a gulf between Western values and Middle Eastern values. I've lived in the Middle East. I studied in Cairo my senior year in college, and I was back in Saudi Arabia earlier this year. And I believe in the modernization and the commitment that the Saudis have made to bringing their culture along. That doesn't mean, you know, that I'm dismissive of, you know, Jamal Khashoggi's murder. It doesn't mean that I don't have sympathy for his fiance, who he was set to marry. And I feel the same about the void that 9/11 families must feel every day when they sit down and a loved one is not there because they were stolen from them on 9/11. I just disagree that the only response available to American golfers is to reject the first time in the history of golf that they've been given a choice. They've been given free agency. But I do believe that we have to be part of the discussion to find what the alternative action is. When I was in Saudi Arabia, we had drivers taking us around to various spots, and I would say 50% of my drivers were women. And at the golf course, in the VIP areas, you saw women who were wearing traditional Muslim Islamic garb to women that were in, you know, shorts or jeans. Golf is now part of the curriculum in elementary school in Saudi Arabia. And leaving aside what golf is as a sport, at its essence, it is about etiquette and, you know, doing the right thing. We call our own penalties. We stand in a way that doesn't obstruct others, there's something to this sport, and I believe those values can seep into the culture as well. But there's a cynical part of this sports washing tag that I want to speak to as a Black man, because not only does that mean the very first Olympics was sports washing, because the Olympics used sports for cultural and political engagement. Nation states put down their arms to compete in sports in the first Olympics. But here in America, the civil rights movement was a partnership between the clergy and Black athletes, from Jesse Owens to Muhammad Ali, Frank, I'm sorry. It's just ignorant to ignore the impact that sports has had in culture in America. But there's another piece that really bothers me. There are 2 Black journalists that I've seen associated with the PGA, Damon Hack and Michael Collins. Everybody else is a white male. Everybody else is a white male. And these folks have written about this sport washing and human rights abuses in Saudi Arabia. And I guess they don't expect me or others to recognize that when we talk about diversity in sports, one of the segments of sports industry that we look at is sports journalism. So these men stand on to a Black man, racism is a human rights violation. So these writers who are writing about human rights violations in Saudi Arabia stand on the rubble heap of a human rights violation in America and point their fingers at others and say, don't try to hold me accountable though. No question that we need to do better. No question that doing better requires a dialogue, but no question, if you're going to be that ignorant, you shouldn't be part of the discussion.
David, you know, this has been a really great conversation. I wish we could go on and on. We're going to have to get you back again sometime, but I think it's also important to note that what you just said rings true for a variety of reasons, and it's a special day today. This is both episode number 42, an important number in sports, and it's the week that the Jackie Robinson Museum opens in New York. So I can't imagine having had a better guest than you to sort of raise these issues that exist in sport, and we have an obligation, I think, as never lose sight of the fact that we are officers of the court. And as such, these are the issues that we need to speak to, and if nothing else, raise the questions. If we don't have the answers, we see an issue, let's spot that issue, let's talk about it. And I think you've just done a great job of doing that in terms of looking at these issues and how you balance sort of the very public social issues involved with what's being said about the Saudis without taking a look to our own culture and what's gone on here. And these are important things, and I think this discussion is going to continue. And it doesn't just exist in the world of live in the PGA. It's an issue that exists in our country and in countries around the world. And if we're not there to ask the questions about it and to point out, look in the mirror, brother, then nobody's there to do it. And if we're not doing that, we've sort of lost our charge in that role of officer of the court. So thank you for doing that. Thank you for joining us today. And thank you to our sponsor, the American Arbitration Association, who's agreed to sponsor Sports Shorts. And we're really happy to have them. They've been a long time conference sponsor, and we're happy to have them with us here on Sports Shorts. So David, thank you again for your time. Thank you for the insight you've provided. Wishing you all the well, and can't wait to hear what's more going on and live down the road with you.
I appreciate it. It's great to be with you. Let's get together soon.
All right, man. On a golf course, I hope.
Yeah, absolutely. That's all I do.
All right, everybody. Take care. We'll see you in a couple weeks.
Thank you.